How well do you know the person who sleeps beside you? People love to believe that money buys certainty, that a view of the river and a private elevator and a driver on call can insulate you from the quiet places where truth hides. I believed it too. I am Alistair Sterling, the man a dozen magazines once called the Oracle of Maritime Finance. I have more homes than holidays in a calendar, more paintings than walls, and at 79 I married a woman named Eleanor, who is brighter than chandeliers and 45 years younger than me. I chose to believe beauty is a kind of honesty. It glows or it does not. It never occurred to me that brightness can also blind. The first time doubt visited, it did not knock. It simply stood in the doorway of a memory and asked a small question. Why does Eleanor always keep two phones? One with a cracked corner she never lets the staff touch. Why does she smile when she's alone, as if listening to a joke in a language I do not speak? Those questions felt unworthy of my love for her. So I placed them in a drawer and slid it shut. The mind of a husband can be as tidy as a ledger when he decides it must be. Yet the world is an untidy accountant. It leaves residues, a smudge on a glass, a receipt in the wrong pocket, a shadow that returns to the same corner each night. One winter evening, I watched snow slow the city to a hush and saw my wife step into that hush with a scarf wrapped high, her perfume a thin ribbon behind her. She said she would be home after a board dinner for a literacy foundation. I kissed her hand and pretended the word foundation did not ring like a bell, calling me to an empty chapel. You might tell me to trust. You might say love is a decision repeated daily. But trust is not a law of physics. It is weather. It can be clear for years and then change in an hour. The hour came when a message slid into my inbox from an address I did not recognize. 3 words. Ask about Ardent. I stared at the screen and felt the tremor of an old instinct, the one that kept me alive in waters where men smile while tightening a noose under the tablecloth. Ask about Ardent. The word sat there like a key on my desk that did not fit any door I knew. I wish I could tell you I closed the laptop and poured a drink and forgot the message. That would make me wiser than I am. I searched. I found an art fair, a boutique fragrance, a shuttered hedge fund, a defunct software company. None belonged to her, none belonged to me. Still the word hummed. I slept beside Eleanor and watched her breathe and felt an ache I had not felt since a storm years ago when a freighter went dark on my charts. The ache was simple. Something was wrong, and I would not rest until I named it. Trust is a house. Suspicion is rain. It does not demolish in an instant. It works at the edges, finds the hairline cracks, creeps inward with patient fingers. I told myself I was protecting what we had built. I told myself answers were a form of love. That is how I stepped across a line I once swore I would never cross. My public life is a picture frame. It holds yacht christenings and hospital wings and garden parties on lawns so perfect they look ironed. In that frame, I am patient, generous, amused by the vanity of markets and the younger men who lean too far over the rail. In that frame, Eleanor is a marvel. She moves through rooms and people lean toward her like sunflowers. She speaks softly and makes ambassadors listen. She can charm an old dowager and a young activist within the same minute, and both feel seen. She learned my staff by name in a week. She knows the chef's mother's favorite tea. She walks into a gallery and chooses the one painting that will double before the season ends. The world calls that intuition. I call it talent. We built a routine the way cities build subways. Invisible tracks under bright surfaces, breakfast at the long table with the newspapers fanned, a Pilates studio that feels like a temple, a calendar that flows from charity to conference to quiet weekends by the lake. When you live like this, your days become both delicate and defended. You cultivate a sense that all variables are accounted for. If a storm comes, it will have sent an invitation. If a crisis lurks, a lawyer has already spoken to it. The clues did not arrive with trumpets. They were small. Eleanor began to favor late afternoon walks without a security detail. She kept a backpack inside her dressing room, not a designer bag, a simple canvas with a stitched red thread near the zipper. She started to travel alone for a day here and there, citing site visits for the Literacy Foundation. One morning she returned with damp hair and said she had been caught in the rain. It had not rained. I noticed 2 faint burns on her wrist, the kind you get when you brush a hot surface. She said the curling iron misbehaved. I nodded and kissed the place where the skin reddened, but something in me filed the detail. There is a way the very wealthy ignore dissonance. We outsource friction. If a door sticks, someone oils it. If a flight is delayed, someone charters the sky. It becomes easy to treat discomfort as a scheduling problem. That is why I missed the pattern at first. The anonymous invitation to ask about Ardent landed. I ignored it for a day, then 2. On the 3rd, a second message arrived. "You are not the only Sterling," it said. There was no address to reply to, no signature, just that single sentence, bright as a fuse. I thought of revenge. I thought of a prank. I thought of a young man with a grudge and an old laptop. Still, the fuse burned. I asked my assistant to pull a travel ledger for the foundation events Eleanor attended in the last 6 months. I asked my driver to note the addresses of any venues she requested to be dropped near, rather than at the door. I asked my head of security to quietly audit access to the penthouse cameras. None of them knew they were helping me question the center of my life. They only knew I was thorough. Expectation is a kind of hunger. You begin to taste the meal before the tray is lifted. The moment of discovery rarely looks like the movies. There is no dramatic envelope slipped across a bar. There is a line in a spreadsheet where a city is wrong. There is a card entry in a garage where no event took place. There is a trip to a neighborhood that does not host galas. I found each of these. My pulse did not roar. It measured out beats like a metronome. Something had shifted. I would either look away and become smaller, or I would continue and accept that there is a price to curiosity even at my age. The confirmation came on a Tuesday, when the sky over Manhattan shone like polished steel. Eleanor kissed my cheek and said she would be at a luncheon uptown to discuss a new library initiative. She wore a cream suit and a particular smile she uses when she wants a room to trust her before she speaks. I watched the elevator doors close and turned to my desk, determined to let the day proceed. 10 minutes later, a silent alert from the building's garage pinged my phone. A plate recognized, not her usual car, a rideshare. The destination, flagged only because it was unusual for my household, appeared as a cross street in the Lower East Side. I told myself it meant nothing. Traffic, a driver error, a surprise visit to a donor in a different neighborhood. Then a second alert. A camera view caught her as she exited the car. No cream suit, a dark jacket, a cap pulled low, the canvas backpack. She moved like a dancer who does not want to be seen dancing. Quick, precise, certain. I could have called her then. Love gives you that right. I did not. I told my driver to meet me at the service entrance. We took a route that made no sense to anyone but me, a man who spent a lifetime reading currents and learning where engines stall. On the way, my mind offered kinder explanations. Perhaps she was planning a surprise. Perhaps she was meeting a lawyer about a gift she wished to make in private. Perhaps she needed space from the orbit of my name and found it in a part of the city that did not care who I was. We stopped half a block from a nondescript door between a discount electronics shop and a bakery that smelled of sugar and cardamom. I stepped into the kind of hallway that exists in every city, a space that feels like a throat. At the end, a keypad. I watched from across the street as 2 young men entered a code and disappeared inside. Their clothes looked like they belonged to students or to ghosts of students who never graduated. I waited. Patience is a skill you either learn early or buy later with staff. I learned it on docks, where storms were conversations with gods you could not see. After 20 minutes, the door opened again. Eleanor emerged with a woman I did not know. They hugged. My wife's face carried the calm of a surgeon after a long operation. She tugged the cap lower and turned east. I followed at a distance. the city making a noise that felt like static. She climbed into another car. When it pulled away, I took a breath so deep it hurt. The superficial truth arrived that evening when she returned home in the cream suit, cheeks warm, eyes bright, full of stories about the luncheon. I asked questions, and she answered them easily, the way you answer questions about things that happened because you were actually there. Only she had not been there. I knew it, and she did not know I knew it. That is how the floor tilted. To soothe the tilt, I tried to accept the simpler secret. I told myself she was volunteering incognito at a shelter or tutoring center. I could have lived with a hidden generosity. It would have even fit her radiant self. But generosity is proud in small ways. It leaves flyers on kitchen counters. It mentions names of kids who made you laugh. It comes home with paint under its nails. What I found instead were code fragments on a scrap paper near her desk, strings of letters and numbers that looked like nonsense until they did not. I recognized a pattern because patterns made me rich. A set of characters resembled an encryption hash. Another line looked like a command I had seen a security auditor demonstrate once in my office when I asked how a pipeline of invoices could be poisoned without anyone noticing. A thought formed that I wanted to reject. I could not. The first crack had become a fracture with edges bright as knives. I approached the problem as I would a crooked deal at sea. I separated emotion from evidence. I created a timeline and filled it with places and names. I asked my accountant to pull every payment from our personal foundation that landed in consultancy buckets. I asked my chief technology officer to audit logs on our home network for unusual outbound traffic. I asked my art advisor to give me a quiet reason to cancel a trip so I could stay close without sounding desperate. No one saw the web I was weaving. They only felt a new breeze in the corridors. Social media, which I disdain in public, became my ally in private. I traced photographs from ordinary people who took pictures of extraordinary pastries. In the corner of one, a reflection in a window, the line of my wife's jaw. In another, a protest poster with a set of symbols that matched the code fragments on her paper. I followed tags that led to gatherings in basements where old couches hosted new ideas. I searched the term ardent again, this time with combinations of words that belonged to risk rather than to charity. A result surfaced that did not appear on the first page. A dormant site with a single page and a promise that read like a dare, keeping the brave alive. Bank statements revealed payments too small to alert a billionaire. 200 here, 700 there, all to shell entities with botanical names. Each corresponded to dates when Eleanor took her simple backpack. Each aligned to a map of meetups and lectures and workshops about digital hygiene. That innocuous phrase hid something else. A week later, the CTO returned with a quiet note. A device in our home pinged an onion network at odd hours. He suggested the router was misconfigured. He offered to fix it. I told him to leave it be. The last piece slipped into place in a storage unit under a bridge where a friend of a friend allowed me entry after hours. I'm not proud of how I acquired the key code. I stood in the corridor among boxes and dust and heard the click of my own pulse. I opened a locker that did not have my name and found a flat case. Inside lay a small laptop covered in stickers that made jokes I half understood and a hardware wallet with a note. For emergencies, when you cannot trust the grid. In the laptop's cache, a folder of articles about whistleblowers who vanished from headlines but not from the lives of those who loved them. Names I knew only as scandals. Names that mean person if you look long enough. This was the truth that surprised me. Eleanor had not built a secret affair or a gambling habit or a petty revolt against boredom. She had built a corridor through walls I never learned to see. She was a technician of escape and exposure, a surgeon of data. The anonymous message had not been a prank. Ardent was a collective that helped people slip messages out of closed rooms without losing their jobs or their lives. It was also a target with powerful enemies. My name, my empire, my resources were both a shield and a beacon. Her public kindness was real. Her private code was a blade. The risk clarified with the harshness of winter sun. If she was who the logs and ledgers suggested, she lived at the edge of laws, written in eras that did not foresee the way information would become oxygen. If she made a mistake, the blowback would not only hit her, it would hit me. My companies, my philanthropy, the scholarships, the hospitals, the orchestra, the men and women who have given their labor to keep my name steady while markets wobble. I felt anger. I felt admiration. I felt the hot sting of being the last to know in my own home. I chose the setting with care, not the library with its portraits staring down judgment, not the bedroom where tenderness might be wounded beyond repair. I asked her to meet me in the conservatory where the city lights make the glass a floating room. She arrived in a simple dress, no jewelry, hair pulled back the way she does when she needs her thoughts to move quickly. She smiled. She kissed my forehead. She asked about my day. I told her I loved her. I told her I had questions. She did not pretend to misunderstand. A flicker crossed her eyes like a cloud moving over a field. I said the word ardent. She did not blink. I said the phrase onion network and watched her mouth settle into resolve. I took out the scrap of paper with code fragments and placed it on the table between us like a photograph of a stranger we had both met. She sat down. The sound of her breath filled the room where we usually hear only leaves and distant sirens. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then she said my name in a way that made me think of our vows. She asked what I wanted to know. I told her I wanted the truth and that I would try to carry it well. What followed was a conversation I would not have believed possible when I first asked her to marry me. She told me she had skills she learned long before we met. Not at a university. In rooms where curiosity was currency and consequence the tuition. She told me she began with small acts, teaching people how not to be found by predators who hunt in forums, helping a nurse avoid a stalker who used hospital records like a map. Then a friend at a newsroom asked a question. Could she help a source send a file without leaving fingerprints? She could. She did. Word moved in the quiet channels, the ones more reliable than headlines. I asked why she never told me. She looked at my hands and said, "Love asks for safety, not surveillance." She said, "My name is not just my name. It is a weather system." If she told me, I would want to protect her. Protection in my world often looks like control. Control kills the kind of work that must breathe in hidden places. She said she was not ashamed. She was cautious. She said something else too. She said power without friction grows into something that forgets how to listen. She loved me. She refused to let my house smother the voices I could not hear from my balcony. I felt the sharpness of her words and the fairness. I pressed the other side of the blade. What about the risks? The legal storms? The vultures who see scandal like opportunity? The people I pay? The families we help? She nodded. She had thought of them. She had built fences of her own. She kept her work distinct from my accounts. She accepted no money for what could be construed as illicit. She trained others to build redundancies so no one person became a key. She told me she would have told me if any line crossed into danger I could not afford. Our argument was an aria with two melodies. Mine about reputation and responsibility. Hers about conscience and autonomy. We did not scream. That is not our way. We exchanged sentences that cut and held. At one point she reached for my hand and I pulled it back. I saw the hurt land and stay. Consequences began there, in that small cruelty. I apologized and she accepted, but the apology did not stitch the slice. The public consequences came faster. A journalist I know, called to say my name, appeared in a cache of leaked chats a hostile outlet planned to publish. The implication would be that I funded digital subversion. A rival sent a message that read like a toast to my impending fall. My communications director texted me at midnight with draft statements about respecting privacy and supporting lawful dissent. I stared at the drafts and felt old for the first time in years. We slept in separate rooms that night. A door closed, another opened. In the morning, she brewed coffee and placed a cup on my desk and said she would leave if that is what I required to protect what I had built. The nobility of it angered me. It sounded like resignation and punishment at once. I asked her for time. She nodded. Time is the only currency the rich cannot buy in bulk. I expected damage control, lawyers, calls to friends who sit on boards where favors are granted with silk gloves. I did not expect the third message. It arrived in the same ghostly fashion as the first. New subject line. Stop looking for Ardent. Look at Hartwell. The name struck like a dropped goblet. Theodore Hartwell is my oldest adversary, dressed as my oldest friend. He is the sort of man who grew up in rooms where the carpet teaches your feet to be quiet. He sits on my hospital board and donates wings that carry his name. He likes to quote Roman historians and sign checks with fountain pens. He's also the sort of man who believes rules are what you make of them if your dinner jacket fits well enough. I forwarded the message to no one. I went to the office and pulled files that do not leave my safe. I traced transactions between one of my shipping subsidiaries and a logistics company, Hartwell, recommended last year, with a smile and a pat on my shoulder. The numbers looked respectable until they did not. A pattern emerged like a watermark. Overbilling in waves small enough to pass beneath alarms, timed to quarters when auditors nap. A pallet swap of vendors that resulted in the same post office box in a country that exists to be a fog. I felt the chill that comes when your past warnings to yourself return with proof. Eleanor came to the door of my study that evening and saw the charts on the table. She asked what she could do. I almost said nothing. Then I said the name Hartwell and watched something in her face harden into purpose. She told me the part she had kept even from herself until the last days. Ardent was not only a refuge for whistleblowers, it had become a net that occasionally brushed against the hulls of men like Hartwell. Patterns that looked like mine appeared in the background of other stories. A dead letterbox that belonged to his people had lit up in a data set she and her circle were asked to clean for a reporter. She did not pursue it because lines are not there only to be crossed, but she kept the echo in her mind. When the first message found me, she feared the ring had widened. She had been trying to keep me out of the blast radius while she confirmed the shape of the threat. The word protection felt different on my tongue then, not a paternal promise, a mutual act. She showed me a small stack of printouts from a place no one would think to look. Patterns that connected Hartwell's charity pledges to vendors to my warehouses. A triangle that looked like a trap. She had been scraping public filings, not hacking my servers, to build a map that any prosecutor would respect and any reasonable man would fear. Then she told me the hardest truth. Someone inside my organization had already tried to raise a flag. A mid-level compliance officer with a habit of arriving early and leaving late had written a quiet memo about anomalies. She sent it to a supervisor who sent it to a council who sent it to the wastebasket of ambition. He was the source Ardent had helped. He was the reason the word found my inbox. He had wanted me to know. He had been told to stop asking questions if he liked his job. I thought of all the meetings where I had spoken of integrity while the floor under me shifted. I thought of my wife in her cap and backpack, walking into rooms I would never enter, because my name would close the door behind me. Everything reassembled under a harsher light. Her secrecy was still a wound. It was also a shield. She was risking herself to keep me from a fall, engineered by a man who toasted me with vintage champagne. We acted, not with press releases, with precision. We moved accounts, we froze contracts. We retained an investigator whose loyalty is not for sale because it was forged in a place where sales had other names. We presented Hartwell with numbers he could not laugh away and offers he could not accept without confessing. He chose to bluster. The newspapers arrived anyway. The story did not paint me as a villain. It painted me as a man under attack who had nearly been made a fool. It painted Eleanor as a cipher. That was a mercy I did not expect. Our marriage did not reset to innocence. It matured We built new rules. She would keep doing work that keeps brave people safe. I would learn the difference between protection and ownership. She would tell me when a line was crossed from noble secrecy into arrogance. I would tell her when fear made me unjust. We would hold each other to these vows, the way climbers hold rope, with trust, and with the knowledge that trust is not weather only. It is also rope that can be inspected and mended. On a spring night, after the worst had passed and Hartwell had retreated into the fog from which he came, we stood on the terrace and watched barges drift north like slow ideas. Eleanor pressed her shoulder to mine and said that perfect lives are often stage sets built to hide the lighting rigs. Real lives are messier and more honest. I told her I did not want perfect, I wanted true. A final message arrived weeks later, not a warning. A simple update from the compliance officer who had risked his job. He had found a new position at a firm that respected the question mark as much as the period. He thanked me for listening. He thanked Eleanor for the corridor that let him remain whole. If you ask me what I learned, I will not offer an aphorism. I will offer this. Love is not a contract with clauses against surprise. It is choosing the same person when the lights reveal what the darkness hid. It is learning to see not only the glow, but the shadow that makes the glow precise. I once believed certainty was the gift of wealth. I now believe clarity is the gift of courage. Trust did not return to us like weather changing. We rebuilt it like a ship, plank by plank, knowing the sea will test our work again. If you want to know what happens next, you will have to stay. Some storms announce themselves. Others whisper a word that does not fit any door you know until the night you decide to ask the question.